The brand new banners for Genshin Impact 4.2 Phase 2 have been revealed, and I think a lot of people were hoping they could completely save after grabbing the Archon. But there are some pretty tempting 4 stars on these banners, and the 5 stars are a lot better than you might think at first glance as well. So we're going to go through all the 4 stars on each banner, both with the 5 stars, and talk about whether they're worth the pull for you. Welcome to Jello Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. Starting with the 5 stars, we've got Cyno and Ayato. I'll be having a full guide coming out for them in the next couple days. But Cyno's a character that has had quite the glow up since he was first introduced. So I think his community perception right now is a little bit lower than it really should be. I think he's a very strong character, but I don't think he's like a valuable character that you go for just to make your account stronger, because being the Electro character on Dendro teams, which is what he is not the highest value character that you can get. Like, he's replaceable. And although I do think if you think about this, right, you've got the top Hyper Bloom teams. He's definitely one of the better characters for Hyper Bloom or Quick Bloom, but you've got Kuki Shinobu as a 4-star staring right at you on the banner. If you're wanting to run Hyper Bloom or Quick Bloom, Kuki is the more flexible character. Cyno has specific Hyper Bloom teams that he works with, and especially coming up right after Farina and Baiju, who are his 2 best partners for Hyper Bloom teams, you might be, if you didn't have those characters already, if you didn't have Cyno already, I don't know how many people are going to have enough wishes to make his premium Hyper Bloom / Quick Bloom team. Of course, you don't need them. You can build Hyper Bloom teams with Yelan or Sing Cho, along with Nahida and Zhongli or something like that. So he has other options. You can even use Kuki on his teams as well. It's a little bit redundant, but you definitely can. You can even use Toma for some quick burgeon stuff. So he definitely has other options. If you want to see a deep dive into all those teams, definitely keep an eye out for my Cyno guide. It's going to be coming out in just a couple days. So those are the Hyper Bloom side. You've also got the Quick Bloom side for him, or sorry, you've got the Aggravate side, where he's going to be paired up with Fischl plus Baiju plus Kazuha. I think his Quicken and Aggravate teams are very underrated. He is absolutely on par with Yaimiko and better than Keqing. Really, really good character. It's not as quick swappy, so if you've got lots of waves of content, he can be clunkier to use than other options. But even despite that, I still think he's one of the best Quicken carries that there is. So overall, but there's also a lot of competition for Quicken. You've got Keqing, who's really good, Yaimiko is really good, even Raiden, who's competent, Lisa competent, and for a lot of people, it's not going to be worth the upgrade / side grade, depending on who you're comparing to, over them. And a lot of those characters, they don't need Baiju in particular, whereas I find Cyno, his longer field time makes it harder to get away with someone like Hirara, although you can get away with it, but towards the end of your rotation, you're much more vulnerable. Same with Yao Yao. But if you do love Cyno, if Cyno's a character that you find fun, which I really do, if he's a character you find cool and awesome, he is a premier DPS for those teams. He's not a cope option. He's not a downgrade. At worst, he's a side grade. At best, he's an upgrade for those teams. Of course, you could also compare him to Alhaitham as an on-fielder for Dendro teams. With Farina, Nahida, Baiju, I personally think he hits pretty much the same level as Alhaitham. Alhaitham might still win out just because he has a little bit more rotational flexibility for quick swappy type stuff. But Farina, Nahida, Baiju, Cyno is a killer team. It is so freaking good. And I would put it around the same level as Alhaitham. So I think people are sleeping on Cyno. I think he's underrated. If you love him, you should get him. But I guess there's also that caveat of that premium team is 3 other 5 stars. You can't really run Farina without running Baiju as well. There's other stuff you can do, and that other stuff is still good. But to take him truly to the very highest level, it's a premium team. It is what it is. So we're going to go over Ayato, then the 4 stars, then we'll talk about the weapon. Ayato is kind of crazy. He basically just works with every single Hydro. Anything you could do with a Hydro, Ayato works there. I think he's probably the most flexible on-field character in the game. I think if you were just to pick one Hydro, one 5-star Hydro for your account, and you just wanted them to work in any Hydro team, it really might be Ayato, because although he's not optimal in Vaporize, you can absolutely use him for Ayato National with Bennett, Shangling, Kazuha, or Sucrose. I think the consensus is Sucrose is a little bit better with him, but you can absolutely use him with Hyper Bloom. You can use him in Nilu Bloom. You can use him in Burgeon. You can use him in Electrocharge. You can use him in Freeze. You can use him primarily as an on-fielder, but you can also build him for being an off-fielder with using Favonia's Sword and do just a bit of on-field here and there, but mostly it's about having that burst uptime for like an Ayato team or something. And now that especially isn't an optimal thing, but the fact that you can just take him and now you can play anything. If it requires AoE hydro, you can do it. If it requires single target hydro, you can do it. On-field hydro, off-field hydro. Ayato does everything. If you want to see me talk about that, again, my guide will be coming out in just a few days, but he really is jack of all trades. And I say jack of all trades because we just got Nouvelette. Nouvelette's power is a high power level. There are things that I prefer Ayato for. I prefer Ayato a lot on Nilou teams. I prefer him a lot on Burgeon teams, but in general, Nouvelette's power tends to outscale Ayato. And of course, Nouvelette doesn't have any off-field presence, so there's an argument to be made for freeze as well to use someone like Ayato. But Nouvelette's raw power scaling is just so high. I didn't even talk about the soup teams for Ayato, which I love. So in terms of power level, Ayato is like just below the very top tier DPSs, but I really think he makes up for it by being so flexible. And a lot of people value flexibility over power, but a lot of people already have a lot of hydros. You may already have Yelan, you may already have Farina, you may already have Nouvelette, you may already have these. And the more hydro you have, the lower Ayato's value is. That's kind of the thing about flexible characters that don't have a really strong niche. They're extremely valuable when they're your first or your second or maybe your third hydro or a character in that role. But as soon as you start fleshing out and having, you know, the premier options for different areas, he becomes less and less. Now, I have every single hydro character built, and I still do pick Ayato for my Nilou teams when I'm playing an AoE. And if I'm feeling like playing Burgeon or something, I want to test out Burgeon, then he's a great option there. So not a character that's like a must pull, not a character that it's an account unlock, because if you're looking for an account unlock hydro, we have Farina right now. So that's sort of generally going to be a better pull. And he's in a bit of a weird spot with Farina because he's obviously not a healer. So using him in Electrocharge with Farina can be a bit difficult because you kind of have to use Gene or something, but then you don't have grouping, which is really important for Electrocharge. And mono hydro, you're often going to be wanting using either Nouvelette or Kokomi on field. So he's in a bit of a weird spot in relation to Farina. I'm not exactly sure where his teams really fall, but if you love Ayato, you'll never not be able to use him, which is a really cool thing. I think once again, character that you get if you love them, or if you're looking if you don't like love any other hydro characters and you just want to have that role filled, he's a great pickup. But I think a lot of people will be going on this banner and putting a few wishes on it to get a copy of Kuki, because obviously Hyper Bloom is still one of the most broken reactions in the game. And even with Farina coming out, although Kuki's healing is not as insane as other healers, because you're using other Catalyst users like Nahida or Baiju on Hyper Bloom teams, you often can run Prototype Amber on your Nahida or just Baiju as a healer, a full stop. So even in the new meta, if you're going to be using Farina Hyper Bloom teams, she still is a premier option for that. And whether you're running an Alhaitham Hyper Bloom, Double Hydro Hyper Bloom, Farina Hyper Bloom, Kuki just comes out on top. But she can also be a support for Aggravate for Spread. So you've got Alhaitham and Spread, you've got Tainari Spread. Kuki's a solid option for those teams. Not as crazy as she is for Hyper Bloom, because role consolidating healer and Hyper Bloom trigger is just really good. It's like how Bennett consolidates buffing and healing all in one kit. That's a lot of team DPS and comfort rolled into one. Now, she is a bit clunky to play before Constellation 2. Before Constellation 2, she doesn't have full uptime on her skill. And so what you need to do is kind of supplement that with her burst in between to get a bit more uptime for Hyper Bloom. But ideally, you just really want to just get her C2. Now, I think if you're trying to snipe a 4-star, going for C2 is very risky. If you just want to get one copy, like I would consider, I think a lot of people are going to be wondering, should I try and snipe Kuki on this banner? And I think the answer is, if you've listened to me talk about Cyno, and if you've listened to me talk about Ayato, and you think, they seem pretty cool. I don't think I want to wish for them, but they seem pretty cool. I would kind of like to have them. And you're on 0 pity, you're not on a guarantee, you're on your 50-50, putting 10, 20, 30 wishes to get yourself a single copy of Kuki, or if you're already at C1, you want to nab one more copy. I think that's a good idea. I know a lot of people don't advocate for building pity, but it's a calculated risk, because if you spend 30 wishes and you get an early 5-star, well, you thought they were kind of cool, so now you have them, so that's pretty cool. And if you don't get them, and now you've got to nab yourself a Kuki, it's just a free Kuki, and you have pity built. You're not building pity, but you have pity built for the next banner. So contrary to what a lot of people would say, I do think there is a place to try and snipe Kuki as a 4-star. Kirara is a great 4-star. Xiangling constellations, right? Xiangling needs her C4 to really pop off. Kirara also really wants her C4 to really pop off, although I don't even have her C4. I never have, and I love her in particular for aggravate teams, but ironically not generally with Cyno, because her shield just doesn't last through the whole duration of Cyno's burst. You're very vulnerable at the end. But with Keqing, with Yaemiko, with Lisa, she can hold the Sapwood Blade, she can hold Instructor's artifact set, so she actually does a very high amount of buffing for your team. And especially if you're running Yaemiko, she is my favorite option for Quicken, because you can swap onto her. If you're playing pre C4, it can be good to have Sacrificial Sword. I think I'll probably have a guide for her come out at some point during this patch, but if not, it's either Sapwood Blade for the buffing or Sacrificial, so you have more chances to charge up her burst for more Dendro application to swap into her. At C4, she gets more off-field Dendro application, so Sapwood is always going to be the play, I think, at C4. But I don't think Kirara is a character that you need to try and snipe, because Yao you get for free for the Lantern Rite. Baiju, if you have Farina, like, Baiju is just the better character. I think, unfortunately, Kirara lost a lot of value with the release of Farina. Farina really wants those healers, and although, you know, Baiju's off-field healing isn't the most insane like Baiju's is, she still gets that really solid healing off and can charge up Farina's stacks. Kirara can't do anything with Farina. Like, there's no world where you play Kirara on a Farina team. That doesn't mean she's useless. She's still great on aggravate teams. She's still great on Nilou teams. Nilou teams, one of the best options for comfort and for damage is Kirara. Actually, I was just thinking, with Farina, what you can do is you could do her as a Hyper Bloom driver on field, because normally you need to use Xingqiu and Yelan to proc. You need to use normal attacks to proc their Hydro for Hyper Bloom, but with Farina you actually don't. But then you don't have a healer. So who would your healer be? I guess it would be Kuki. I'm not sure. There's a free-to-play Hyper Bloom team in there with Kirara on field. But yeah, using her on field in Nilou teams is amazing. So she's a great character. Obviously, C4 Xiangling. I already have a guide out for Xiangling. It's an incredible guide. I'm going to link at the end of this video. It's really still up to date. The only thing that it doesn't include is Sucrose National with Farina. Such a good team. Xiangling even got an upgrade with Farina. Maybe not an upgrade, but it feels like an insane team. Sucrose, Bennett, Xiangling, and Farina. So good. But there's obviously a ton of things you can do with Xiangling, and I talk about it all in my guide. Amazing character. So the 4-stars in this banner just kind of cracked, right? If this was pre-Farina, even I would call Kirara a top-tier unit in terms of 4-stars, or maybe not top tier, but a high-tier unit on this banner. And even still, she's a high-tier unit. So overall, really great 4-stars, really solid 5-stars. Not a bad banner to build pity on if you're really wanting to snag a Kuki or two. So let's move over to the weapon banner, where things are also looking pretty darn good. The Staff of the Scarlet Sands is just full stop one of the best polearms in the game. A huge amount of crit rate, elemental mastery. Let's pull it up. So again, massive crit rate. Equipping character gains 52% of their elemental mastery as bonus attack. When an elemental skill hits opponent, the Dream of the Scarlet Sands effect will be gained for 10 seconds. The character will gain 28% of their elemental mastery as bonus attack, max 3 stacks. So you get a ton of bonus attack based on your elemental mastery. So this is best for Cyno, Xiangling, Reverse Melt Rosaria. It's amazing for Hu Tao, one of her best weapons. And that's pretty much most of the good polearm users in the game. I definitely think this is a reasonable alternative to Staff of Homa. Like, if you really want Ayato's weapon, for example, and you're looking at Scarlet Sands as sort of a more universal weapon, it's a top tier, if not just one step below a top tier polearm. In terms of how it will age, because it gives attack from elemental mastery, it's a bit more niche, because it doesn't give something like elemental damage bonus. If it gave elemental damage bonus based on elemental mastery, that would be a bit more universal. Giving attack, there's a good chance we see more and more characters scale off of HP, off of defense, off of other things. But it's a huge upgrade if you use Xiangling. It's a huge upgrade if you use Hu Tao, and you have basically, if you use Hu Tao and you have anything but Staff of Homa, this is going to be her best weapon. I think it's just full stop Xiangling's best weapon, if I'm not much mistaken. It's obviously Cyno's best weapon. Really great. That doesn't mean I'm saying they need to get it. I'm not going to get it. I don't have it. You don't need 5-star weapons in this game to full star the Abyss. I would say the biggest value is drip and not having to farm as many artifacts to get to that threshold to clear the Abyss. The second weapon is the Haran. Say the Haran is a pretty underrated weapon. It gives 33% crit rate at level 90, but has a bit of a higher base attack. You gain a 12% all elemental damage bonus, and then when other nearby party members use elemental skills, this is a universal condition, all party members are going to be using their skills, the character gains stacks, and the stacks give normal attack bonus. So obviously not many characters use normal attacks. It's not a super crazy bonus just for normal attacks, but the 12% elemental damage bonus is universal, and the crit rate and this just being a stat stick is really good. Obviously the biggest problem with this weapon is we already have 2 crit substat 5-star swords that are really broken with the Mist Splitter and the Primordial Jade Cutter. So it can be a bit awkward if you already have those swords, but I think it's just a little bit more universal than people give it credit for. It will often still outperform 4-star options, even if you're not using that normal attacks. Because for Ayaka, I think it's her second best sword, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe, I don't know how well Farina's works in Ayaka, but it's one of her better swords. Solid stat stick for Xingqiu. Obviously, you're not using, if you're using him on a double Hydro team, you don't need the energy. It's a very solid stat stick for him. It's a solid option for Keqing. It's not going to be as good as Jade Cutter or Mist Splitter, but a really good option. Obviously, it's Ayato's best weapon. It's going to be solid on Alhaitham, and it's going to be solid on Farina. You would prefer the Jade Cutter though, and Farina especially, she almost always wants that energy, and the pipe is so good on damage. So like, what I'm saying is it's not a weapon that you go for, and it's not a universal weapon like the Jade Cutter or the Mist Splitter, but if you're going for Cyno's weapon, it's not bad to get a copy of the Huron. Like, it's not, as long as you're using some character that does that uses crit and elemental damage bonus, it's a solid weapon to have in your roster, and I think it could age well. I think that there is much room for normal attack sword characters. It's obviously not like a crazy weapon. It's not like a huge win like seeing the Mist Splitter alongside the staff or seeing the Jade Cutter alongside, but I think it's still like there's so many worse options that it could have been. So I wouldn't just wish on this weapon banner overall for value, but if you're wanting to go for your Ayato weapon or for your Cyno weapon, losing to the other is not so bad. I will point out that this weapon does synergize with Ayato very well, so it does give him a huge boost to his personal damage, but his personal damage isn't as high as a lot of on-field carries. He mostly gets his value from his Hydro application and Hydro reaction, so boosting his personal damage isn't as impactful as it is for other carries. So still good if you love Ayato, you want to get his signature weapon, best weapon, you can feel good about it, but it's by far not a must-have. He's not, and it's not a, like, even versus a character like Novelette, he gets so much more out of his signature weapon because he's such a high portion of the team damage. Something to keep in mind. For Cyno, this is a solid upgrade. He gets so much value out of this weapon because he's already building elemental mastery, getting more attack for that elemental mastery, really valuable. Big damage upgrade, and he does a good portion of the team's damage. So if you're a Cyno main, it's by far not a must-have because he works well with Jade Wing Spear, he works well with Homa, and he works well with the new battle pass weapon, the Ballad of the Fjords, but he's definitely one of the characters that benefits a lot from his signature. So if you're wanting to go for it, now's a pretty good time because let's look at the 4 stars. 4 stars are really quite good. Favonius Bow, excellent. Lion's Roar, underrated on Keqing as it is super close to her best weapon. It's her best 4-star by far. Underrated also on Xingqiu when you're using him in national team with Raiden. It's a very powerful effect as long as you're using it on team where the effect of this weapon can be activated, giving attack percent and then increased damage by 40% at refinement 5. That's a huge amount of damage bonus. Lion's Roar is a great weapon, but very niche, so definitely not as good as something like Favonius Sword or Sacrificial Sword, one of the more supportive weapons. It's rare that you're going to build it outside of having, like, using Keqing on your account, so it's probably the worst weapon on this weapon banner, but it's a pretty decent weapon. It's far from useless like a lot of weapons are. Widsith, one of the best catalysts in the game in terms of 4 stars especially. Most DPS catalyst characters want the Widsith. I use it on my Nahida pretty much always, but works amazing with Yaimiko, especially on Aggravate. But it even is a solid stat stick, like even for Wanderer teams. Pretty much every DPS catalyst except for Novelette would want the Widsith as their 4-star option. Novelette would just still prefer Prototype Amber. So great weapon. And then obviously Favonius Greatsword, one of the best Claymore. It's easily the best Claymore option that you could have. Like if you're using, and it's probably going to age well if we get more and more supportive Claymores. Right now we don't have a ton, but whether it's for for Dea. If you're using support Dea for Novelette or something, that's the weapon you'll be running. If you're using on-field Noelle in Farina teams, it's actually an option that you can use. I know it's kind of weird, but still a good option. Claymores are generally just bad, except for because you have the Serpent Spine basically, and there's not a lot of characters that there's just not a lot of Claymore characters overall, and not a lot of ones that are like really, really high value. But out of the Claymores that you could have, this is the best one. And then of course the very best weapon in the entire game, Favonius Lance, is here. You can never have enough copies of Favonius Lance. It's like every support polearm wants Favonius Lance, and they will until the end of time. Insane weapon, really, really broken, especially, and there's no real alternatives. There's no sacrificial polearm. So Favonius Lance, great to get. I wouldn't go for just, I want to make sure you do the usual disclaimer is that you do not want to wish on the weapon banner unless you actually want both 5-star weapons. If you only want one 5-star weapon, you're just simping for your character, make sure you at least have 200 wishes. By the end of the banner, you'll have 200 wishes, because you do not want to have to spend once you have those 2 out of 2 fate points pulled up. I have lost every weapon banner 50-50 pretty much ever. I've gone to full fate points like I think every single time I've wished on the weapon banner. So, and that's like 3 or 4 times. So be careful. Don't just put random wishes on it. But if you're looking for an upgrade for your Cyno or Ayato, this is a great one to go. Let me know who you're wishing for. Also keep in mind our favorite Swifty is coming up in the very next patch. So if you are saving for Navia, please be careful. Also, I'm pretty excited for Chevreuse. I don't know. I think she's gonna have a really interesting kit. So let me know who you're wishing for, and we'll see you next time. Watch the Zhangling guide. It's really good.